Well, welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you. Today I'm going to do something that's absolutely new for me. I'm going to try baguettes. Now, I've not done this before, but as you can see, it did turn out. And I can tell you that while my finished product wasn't perfect, it was better than anything I've ever bought in a store. So let me show you what I did. I'll tell you what I learned, and we can both learn how to make the perfect baguette. Let's get cooking. So let's go over the ingredients. I have here 2 cups of all-purpose flour and 2 cups of bread flour, and you can use a different ratio. I would say you need to always have more all-purpose flour or totally all-purpose flour. This is 3/4 teaspoon of instant yeast. It works differently if you use active dry. This is 1 teaspoonful of diastatic malt powder. That's totally optional. I've been using it lately. Professional bakers use it because it helps develop the gluten and it helps with a browner, more golden brown finished product. And then this is the salt. And yes, I know, normally you don't put the salt directly with the yeast. This is a slow rise bread. It doesn't matter if it retards the rise. It's okay. It should. I have here 1 2/3 cup of cold water. And yes, I mean cold water. French bread needs to be made at somewhere around 75 degrees. My kitchen's always about 78 to 80. I put a piece of ice in this to cool it down to about 75. And I'll take other steps as we go along to cool it down. So just pour all the water right into a well in the middle, and I start mixing. And basically, it doesn't make much difference how you mix it. You're going to start out with a lot of water, and at the end, you're going to think it's too dry, but it's fine. Those proportions work. But we don't want to work it too much. We don't want to activate the gluten too early in this process. So if you'll see, I'm doing this kind of gently, and no, you can't do it with your hands because your hands are warm. So the only thing I can explain about this, because I know it kind of looks awkward, and it actually is kind of awkward, but you want to incorporate all the dry mixture into the water, and you want to do it without too much pulling, because pulling is kneading, and that activates the gluten. So I'm doing it slow. I'm folding and cutting instead of pulling and stirring. And you know, this is my first time. I have no idea if this really makes a difference, but I usually study a lot before I begin a project, and I'm pretty sure that it does. Well, I think we're almost there. I'm going to cut down into it. Look under it, make sure there's no flour. It's pulling away from the bowl. I just want to make sure there are no dry spots down in here. And it is getting really hard to work. It's very stiff, and it's oh so sticky. And it's getting a bit too stiff for my spatula here, so I'm going to get out my dough scraper and just make sure that I've got all the flour incorporated in. Now, I'm showing you probably more of this than I need to, but I want you to see and not get discouraged and not break down and add any water. Really, this is stiff. It's almost hard, and that's normal. That's the way it's supposed to be. So I think we got it here, and I'm gonna form it up into a ball. Scrape everything away that I can. Don't want to lose any of it. And then we're ready for the first proofing. Let me get my proofing bowl, and we'll take the next step. This is my proofing bowl, and you know, you could just take it out and wash that other bowl and use it for proofing if you want to. You just want to make sure your bowl is big enough to give you some room to work in the bowl. And I've put a little water under here, a little cool water with 1 piece of ice to retard the rise. This is going to rise for 45 minutes in a cool place. We'll do that 4 times. And I'll be back here to show you the next step in 45 minutes. So it's been 45 minutes, and I want you to see this. Now, we're not going to knead this dough at all. Our whole goal here is to slow down the rise. We're going to have 3 hours of rising time just for this stage. So I floured my hands a little, and really as little as possible. This dough is very, very sticky. You don't want it to stick to your hands, but we're not trying to add any flour to this at this point. We want a sticky dough. So now we're going to do a stretch. And I grab one side, pull it slowly, stretch it, fold it over. Then across from that, grab it, pull it up and stretch it. Let it really stretch out and fold it over. Then pull it and stretch it. You see, I'm just making an envelope here. Fold it over. And I'm actually being intentionally careful and tender and gentle with the dough. We're just stretching it. We're not kneading it. And fold it over. Then flip it and back for the next 45 minutes. You may want to keep a little pad to make sure you don't lose track. I'm going to add one more piece of ice because this will warm up in my kitchen. But the dough's getting smooth. It's starting to look like bread dough. And I'll be back in 45 minutes. But before I put this back for its second rise, I'm going to check my water temperature. You know, I don't want my water to be over about 75 degrees. My kitchen is probably close to 80 degrees now, and it's probably 95 outside, so it's going to stay that way. So I'm going to add a little ice to this water just to keep my temperature down to the right range for the right speed of rise. Now I'll put this away 45 minutes, and then I'll come back. Now the second fold. And I want you to see that we really are having bread dough form here. We're going to do the same thing again. And the only reason I'm going to show you all of this is so that you can see the texture as this dough forms. Because it does change as we go. And even though we're not kneading it, we're going to get this beautiful soft dough. And the slow rise in French bread is where your flavor comes from. You know, the ingredients we use to make this dough are just pretty generic. And French bread has a unique flavor and texture that you really don't find in anything else. And that's due to the slow rise and treating the dough in a very gentle way. So this is the second of 3 folds. Let me flip it over, and I'll put the lid on, and I'll be back in 45 minutes. Don't forget to write it down so that you remember where you are. And I'm not going to do anything else to the water. I think we're fine at this point. See you in 45 minutes. So this is the last fold. Stretch and fold. Stretch and fold. And you can see the texture we're getting. When we first started, I wasn't sure we were going to end up with actual bread dough, but we do. We have actual bread dough here, and it's almost velvety looking. Has a sheen to it. It's shiny, but it is still sticky. So once again, I'm flouring my hands with as little flour as possible. Don't want to incorporate much more into it at this point. And when I get this folded, I'm going to cover it, let it do its last fourth 45-minute rise, and then we will come back and form the loaves. Now this is my old bread canvas, and I'm flouring it pretty well. You can do this directly on your counter if your counter is appropriate. Mine is not. And I'm not using one of those silicone pads because this dough is going to be very, very sticky. This is what I use for pie crust. And it works really well, but you don't have to have it. So I have this very soft, sticky dough, and I'm going to flip it out, and I'm going to leave it right side up for now. Still gently, I'm going to press. I'm going to press this out into a big rectangle, and at this point I will have to have a little flour. I'll tell you again, use as little flour as possible. We want this to stay very soft. We don't want a stiff dough at all. So I'm pressing it gently, patting it. Bubbles form as I work, and especially around the edges, and you can hear them popping and cracking. So what we want to do is to get this as even as possible into a rectangle so that we can cut it. And I will use a scale, and I suggest you use a scale, but I still, oh look, the oil's staying in my pad. That's okay. I can fix that later. Where was I? You want to make this as even, as uniform as you can all the way around. You stretch and pat, but don't knead and don't be rough. And I'll pull my scale out, and I want to cut these as close as possible. As I say, I don't know how it's going to turn out, but my goal here is to end up with 3 16-inch loaves, which, by the way, is not really a baguette. It's really called a batard or bata. Speaking French with a southern accent sometimes kind of hard. It has to be 21 inches, I think, to actually be a baguette. So these are batards, but the length is the only difference. So I'm separating it, folding it over. I've got my scale over here. I should have weighed the whole dough ball before I started, and then I would know my goal, but it's going to be pretty close. And I'll pinch and cut off little pieces to even them out until I have 3 pretty much even balls of dough. And these are within a ½ ounce, so I'm going to go with that. Now, forming the loaves for French bread is a 2-step process. And I'm going to show you the first step. Now, I've seen this done a couple different ways. I'm just going to pick one and try that way. Everybody does a 2-step process. How you do this first fold varies a little bit. So I'm going to press it out into a rectangle, and then I'm going to fold it into a third, and then seal it with my hand, and then fold another third over and seal it with my hand. And it seals really easily because this is still, pretty tacky. It's a tacky dough. And then you want to roll it, and the rolling is not just for shaping, it's for creating surface tension, and apparently that's one of the things that causes the nice browning. So I rolled it a little bit, and I'm going to lay it over here with the seam side up, and I'll show you one more. Spread it out, get it as squared off as you can, because you want the ends to be as thick as the middle. Fold it over, seal it with your fingers or your hand, fold it over, seal it, sort of tuck it in. Let's make it neat. And then I push it in a little bit and roll it. Roll it to create that surface tension. And compact it and maybe roll it a little bit more. And there you go. I'll do this other one and be right back. So they're all 3 preformed, and that's what it's called, preforming. And I'm going to cover them sprinkle a little flour on them, and then cover them with some plastic wrap, and then just leave them alone for 15-20 minutes. You're not really letting them rise, you're letting them rest. You want it to relax before you actually form your loaves, and anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. Now, before I actually make the loaves, I'm going to show you this little piece of equipment here. This is called a couche, and it's just a piece of canvas. You don't have to buy a special canvas. If you have a lint-free stiff linen dish towel, that will work too. But I got this because I plan to do this pretty often, and I like to say the word couche. So now we're going to form the rolls, and I'll remind you again, I have never done this. So I'm working actually from a Julia Child recipe. This is not quite her recipe, but this folding, I watched a Julia Child video because I knew if anybody could show it to me, it would be Julia. And so I've taken it, and I'm taking the preformed roll, and I'm spreading it out in a long rectangle. And again, you want to make sure that the ends are as thick as the middle. I'm gently patting it out, using as little flour as possible on my hands. And then we're going to see if I can do this. So we're going to make a letter fold, and I'll turn this over to about a third. Press it down as I go. You want to seal it. And it's still a very tacky dough, so it seals pretty easily. It doesn't fight back, doesn't flip back. And if you're doing this, you can see why this canvas is very helpful. Press it down, flatten it out a little bit, flip it over, and then we'll go another third. And press it down. Now I'm going to tell you, Julia Child's recipe, there's one more step. You flatten it out, make a trench down the middle, and fold it in half. I'm not going to try that. I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. I think this is pretty close to a good roll, so I'm going to go with it. And then we'll do the rolling again to build that surface tension. So we'll start in the middle and roll. And I'm going to try to get this to 16 inches. And full disclosure, I'm going to tell you now that was a mistake. If you want to end up with a 16-inch roll, baguette, batard, you want to take this step to 14 inches. Because I have what I thought was a 16-inch pan, but it's actually a 15.5-inch pan. And when I got done, this wouldn't fit in it, and I didn't have a bigger one. So I improvised. I'll show you when I get to it. But you want to roll this and get it as even as possible. And when we're done with it, I'm going to take it and put it on the couche. And you can see this is still forming bubbles. You know, we retarded the rise, so we've got some rising and activity going on in there. And you just push them out or roll them out as you go. Now I'm going to measure this, and this goes to 16 inches. Actually, just a tad over 16. I don't know where my mind was. But we're going to go with this. It's going to end up actually being a baguette. It's going to be almost, well, it'll be about 18 inches when it finishes rising, which is too long for my pan. I'm getting a new pan. Don't hate me. So I'm going to move this over to the couche. And you make a little ridge there. And you're going to flour it just a little bit. Be careful with how much flour, because you're never supposed to wash these. When you're done, you take it up and you shake it like a rug. And then you fold it up and put it away. So I'm going to lay this with the seam side up. And then I'm going to make the second little ridge. And this is since you don't have a pan, you want something to sort of make it stay in shape, and that's what the couche is for. I'm just going to set this cornmeal right here to hold it in place. Then I'm going to make the second loaf. I don't think you want to watch me make all 3 of them, but I'll be back when the loaves are all made. So they're all made. They're all ready to start the rise. I've made the last little ridge there. I'm going to set my cornmeal here. I'm preheating my oven to 475, and I have an empty cast iron skillet underneath the rack where the bread's going to be. I'm going to cover it here, let it rise for 30 minutes. I'll be back. So it's been 30 minutes, and let's check it. And you check it by making a very gentle push, and if it stays indented, filling it very slowly, then it has risen long enough, and it's ready to pan up. You're going to need some kind of a board to transfer these long loaves without tearing them up. You don't have to buy a special board. I cut the top off of a cardboard box. And we're going to flip this over onto this board because, you know, we had the seam side up. Now we have the smooth side up. And this is where I realized I had made a mistake. That my 16-inch pan was really a 15-inch pan, and it didn't matter because I had a 17-inch loaf. So I flipped my pan over and shaped it with just one of the loaves. I was going to cook 2 at a time, but I ended up doing 1. So there's a little cornmeal here to keep it from sticking, make the bottom crisp. So this little tool that I have is a baker's lame. I'm brushing off any flour. That's Lame, lame, and you can just use a razor blade. But I thought this was cute, so I got it. And you're supposed to cut this in 3 or 4, depending on length, slits that overlap and stay on the top third of the bread. I'm going to tell you now I didn't cut it deep enough. You can tell on my finished product I should have cut it deeper. This was my first time. I'll know next time. So this next part is very important, and of course I didn't catch it all on film. So I'll just tell you I have a little squirt bottle in my hand, a mister, and I am misting this bread with water, just plain water, and that's what helps make the steam and the crust is very important. So we're ready for the oven, and as you can see, I have a cast iron skillet down there, and right before I came to put the bread in, I threw a cup of water in, and I'm going to put my bread in, and I'm setting my timer for 25 minutes. Then at 2 minutes, open the oven, get your squirt bottle, and squirt a big lot of steam in there. No, I didn't fix my hair. I never fix my hair. Then at 4 minutes, open the oven, squirt, squirt, squirt. We are simulating a commercial oven for baking French bread, and they have steam. The steam is what makes that distinctive crust. And at 6 minutes, we're going to turn the pan in the oven so that we get even browning. And I'm going to squirt it again, and then we can leave it for the rest of the 25 minutes. And you know, guys, if I'd known my head was going to be in there, I would have fixed my hair. You're just lucky you didn't see that I'm actually in my pajamas. And at the end of 25 minutes, look what I've got. I've got French bread. Yes. And I can tell now that I did not cut it deep enough. Next time I will. I'm going to move this over to a rack, and you absolutely must let this cool for an hour and a half to 2 hours. If you cut it before it's room temperature, you just wreck all your work. So have patience and wait. And this is how it should sound. So I've waited. I've been good. You can see I cooked the other 2 and made them a little bit shorter. I just cut them off and put them in another pan. I've learned a lot about this. I've learned that I need to cut them more deeply. I've learned I need a bigger pan or smaller loaves. Say you can tell how it's going to taste by how it sounds when you cut it. So I'm going to let you listen to the cut. And again. That makes my mouth water just hearing it. And I'm pretty sure you can't get that crunch without the steam. Whoops. Or so Julia says. I want you to look too at the texture. There are holes in it. That's fine. It is soft inside. But you can tell it has a little resistance. That crust is just wonderful. The butter is calling my name, and I'm kind of wishing I had some brie. I must go find some brie for this tomorrow. Let's give it a taste test. Did you hear that? This is real French bread, and I made it at home, and you can make it at home too. Just remember, measure your pans first. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. So glad you joined us. Hope to see you again tomorrow.